There's nothing wrong with small tactical moves. If a recession is coming, you could overweight some equities some sectors that do well during market recessions. Does that mean you sell all your riskier equities and go on defensive stocks? No. But if you have a set strategy, a range, and you tilt one way or the other, just like with the detour, there's no guarantee the detour works out. But I'm making an educated small adjustment based on the real world around me. And in all likelihood, if it doesn't work out, am I still sticking to the same strategy? Am I still going to get to my destination in kind of a reasonable range of times? Yeah, of course you are.
Welcome to the Healthy and Wealthy Retirement, where your certified retirement counselor Mark Struthers takes a holistic approach to retirement, going beyond finances and embracing holistic well-being. This YouTube channel will address not just the financial part of retirement, but also the social, the physical, and the emotional parts of retirement. Everything you need for healthier, a wealthier, and a happier retirement.
Welcome to the Healthy and Wealthy Retirement. My name is Mark Struthers. Happy spring. We're here in Minnesota, and there is often we often get snow showers, sometimes up until April. So it's actually pretty cold out right now. Today we are talking about strategy versus tactics. And the reason we're talking about this is we're trying to give you some tools to handle market volatility. We want to make sure that you have the healthiest, the wealthiest, and the happiest retirement you can. And understanding and, well, not panicking, and actually having some peace of mind around your investments. And it's a subject that I'm always looking for better ways to help clients through their journey. And I've had a lot of conversations here recently. And it's most often when there's a downturn, or especially when you almost have like a forecasted recession. Because with the tariffs coming around, it's very clear that even the administration talks about a time of transition. And I have some clients that are in manufacturing. They can see the writing on the wall that you could certainly have a recession coming up. You also have conversations once in a while when you have kind of fear of missing out, where their colleague doubled their money in an individual stock, Meta or whatever it is, and they get FOMO, even though quite often when folks say that, it's kind of like someone coming back from Vegas. They don't tell you about all the times that they lost. It is very natural for us to have anxiety around our investments, especially as we approach retirement. And going into retirement and during retirement is where it matters most. That's why a lot of folks do get help, even do-it-yourselfers, when it comes to dealing with producing a retirement paycheck, dealing with taxes. And it's a lot simpler when you're younger. When I talk to clients about strategy versus tactics, I often look for examples. And today we're going to use an example. I think it works. I've run this by a couple clients. I ran this by my assistant. And we're going to take a road trip. So we're going from Minnesota to Las Vegas. I think it's like, depending on which way you go, and that's part of our story today, I think it's like 1,600 miles. It's a long drive. And we are going to break that down into strategy versus tactics. So the strategic part of your road trip is the big picture plan. You're going to ask yourself, where am I going? In this case, Vegas, but then also why? Where and why? Same with retirement or other goals. Why are you doing it? Where are you going and why? In the case of Vegas, you could have a different retirement reason. It's always good to ask, are you leaving a legacy? Do you want a certain quality of retirement? You don't want to have to worry about running out of money, long-term care, whatever it is. In this case, our destination is Vegas for our road trip, and we're going. Well, we are going there. So I'm taking my two boys there in July. We're going because NBA summer camp. It's a cheap way to see pro basketball, and then also there's lots of hiking around there. So they love some of the tougher trails, and I think part of the reason they love it is they love to see how far ahead they can get of their old man. And it's been years since I could keep up with them, and I'm okay with that. A few times my sons do something together is when they're crushing my spirits. But we're going to Vegas. So where and why? The next question is, what type of journey? How are we getting there? In this case, we're driving. And the reason I chose Vegas is because, from what I understand, you can take a very direct route through the mountains, but it's riskier. There's large cliffs, there's snow, road closures, rock slides, more accidents. There's a lot more that can go wrong, and it's a lot more stressful. So, for example, we're going to say you can take the riskier path, and you can get there within 2 days. Or you can go down south around the mountains or some variation thereof. And we're just using our example. That particular path, it could take you 5 days. And with each of these paths, as you could tell, we're making an analogy to the riskiness of your portfolio. The riskiest path is the most stressful. It's least enjoyable, but you can get there faster. But if something goes wrong, it could take you even longer. Instead of 2 days, it could take you 2 weeks. So if everything goes right with this risky path, you save time, because you have a higher return in the investment analogy. The southern path is more relaxing, even enjoyable. It just takes you longer. You also have more certainty. So the more, we'll call it the balanced path, the less risky path, we know that we'll get there typically in 5 days, but it could be as early as 4 or late as 6. So we don't have a wide variation. We go into this journey knowing more. And that's what it's like with risk in your portfolio. And the main analogy here is each route is a different risk level and equity. So you could think going through the mountains is mostly all equities, risky assets. Going down south has a lot higher, you have a higher allocation to fixed income. Fixed income is the ballast. It slows you down a bit, but it makes the ride smoother. And you really have to decide, would you rather have a more certain, more predictable 5 days, or a less certain possibility of 2 days? So when we think about the strategy big picture, we decide where we're going, why we're going, how we're going to get there. And part of that, when it comes to investing, is diversification. So the main diversification is stocks and bonds. And when you come up with a strategy, do you change it very often? No, typically no. And you could think that if you start down one path and then all of a sudden you're trying to change to another or back and forth, like many people who wanted to take on, and I had a lot of folks do this, a lot of risk when the animal spirits were good, and then change it when there's a recession on the horizon. If you're moving back and forth between routes, if you're trying to time the market, time recessions, you could get lucky, but you're probably not going to get to your destination. And I will add also, if you have too much fixed income, you go too far south around the mountains, you're probably going to run out of gas. You need a certain amount of risk in your retirement portfolio to get that return above inflation. You need a certain amount of risk in your journey to get there in a reasonable amount of time. So, all equities is very risky. And if you do it, you got to be prepared for the outcome, but also fixed income. Again, you can't have returns above inflation without risk. And it's a matter of how much you have for what type of journey you want. So we have our strategy. We set off on our journey. Where do tactics come in? Well, tactics are the day-to-day things that you do to deal with real life, with real world. So when do I stop for gas? If you're taking the riskier route, that's a part of risk, I think, going through the mountains is you have fewer gas stations. There's just a lot more to go wrong. But either way, for either journey, you have to map those things out, saying, where do I stop for gas? Where should I grab lunch? Some tactical decisions would be, if there's a traffic jam, do you take a detour? If there's an accident. And you can see as you're driving along, if your strategy is to take this road. But if you stay here, in all likelihood, you could have we'll call it a 3-hour wait at this traffic jam. But you say, hey, there's a little detour. That'll take half an hour. So there's no guarantee I could get to the traffic jam and it's gone. And there's no guarantee this detour will work out. Things could go wrong there too. But in all likelihood, am I changing my strategy by going around the detour to get back on the same road? Strategy is still the same, but I made a small variation to deal with a real life problem. In our analogy, it would be akin to saying if you had, say, a risk level 70. Most of the time when they say 70, it means 70% equity. That's not entirely true. All different equities have different risk levels, but for our example, and say your portfolio had a nice run, and you say, you know what, there's a higher chance of recession, let's go to 65. Or let's beef up my emergency fund, especially if you're still working. You say, you know what, this could affect my job. Let's increase our emergency fund, our risk level decreases, or increase our fixed income. Is going from 75 to 65 a violation of your strategy? How are you changing strategies? Generally, no. When we come up with our investment policy statements, we have a range. So you can be disciplined and stick to your strategy and still have tactical tilts. That's where anytime you are making changes, ask yourself, are you changing the strategy? Now, if you go from a risk level 70 down to a risk level of 10 because you're fearing a recession, that's a change in strategy. And if you're changing strategy, ask why. And then, because if you're doing it if you're doing it, you're just trying to time the market, or you're acting out of greed or fear. If all of a sudden you got really sick, or you decided for some reason felt like you had to retire 5, 6, 7 years earlier, then you say, yep, we're changing where we're going, we're changing why we're going there and how we're going there. And it might be necessary, but those are the things you need to ask for before you panic. If you know what your strategy is and why you're doing it, and you go through these things, it's going to be a lot easier to stay the course. And realize there's nothing wrong with small tactical moves. If a recession is coming, you could overweight some equities, some sectors that do well during market recessions. Does that mean you sell all your riskier equities and go in defensive stocks? No. But if you have a set strategy, a range, and you tilt one way or the other, just like with the detour, there's no guarantee the detour works out. But I'm making an educated small adjustment based on the real world around me. And in all likelihood, if it doesn't work out, am I still sticking to the same strategy? Am I still going to get to my destination in kind of a reasonable range of times? Yeah, of course you are. So when you feel greed, when you feel fear, it's good to say, what's my strategy? And are there tactical things I can do, maybe just to make you feel better, and just realize the possible outcome? Like with our detour example. If you take a detour, you're for sure taking a half hour extra than you had planned, but given what's going on the road, you might save time. It's just not guaranteed. One way to think about it is you should regularly review your strategy, but make changes rarely. But you need to make sure that your destination still aligns with your goals, and you can adjust your tactics to stay flexible and responsive. Also, and part of tactics could be you take advantage. Say your numbers look good and your job looks good, and I had a couple in not horribly long ago where things look really good for them. She had planned kind of a work comfortably in retirement, kind of a dream job to where she doesn't mind working into her mid to late 60s. He is very comfortable working a part-time job. If they want to, they could say, you know what, the market's down 10, 20%. Do they increase their risk level from 70 to 90? That's probably too much. But if they say, you know what, let's go to 70 to 75. Let's if they are wrong, are they still going to reach their goal and are according to our strategy? Yes. And that's what you have to look at. So when we're looking at the lost decade from 2000 to 2010 for the S&P 500, and it's not uncommon. Japan had much more than a lost decade, really. And you think, what can I do about it? Well, diversify. When we look at some of the international stocks, like there's an index called MSCI EFA. You don't know what it is, but it has international stocks. Instead of being down 1% annually, roughly, it was up 1.4. So instead of a negative 10, you returned 15. So having that in there would have made for a much smoother ride in that 10-year period. Emerging markets over 9%. In other asset classes, and it's certainly, you don't have to get too extreme to get too far away from the US to where you could at least keep pace with inflation. It would have been a less bumpy ride. It wouldn't have been going through a rough mountain pass that was terrifying, even though you could make your trip. And when you're diversified like that, you do give something up. If we zoom out and take the last 25 years, the S&P 500 has returned roughly 7.5% total return. And when I talk in terms of here, it's total return. And if you forget the last 25 years, if you zoom out, the S&P 500 actually generally gets around 10 over super long periods of time. And getting in terms of inflation used to run closer to 3, S&P returned 7. So this is 7.5% before inflation. But keep that part, the big reason for that is that you did have a lost decade. And the MSCI index, that its excess return disappeared over the last 15 years. So it returns a little over 4, emerging markets about 5.8. So you could see where having exposure to being diversified like this, certainly it cushioned the downtime for you, but you did suffer for return over the long term. But even when you think about diversification, you don't have to go with the index. The index now for international, I think, is roughly 35%, and even then, it's come down since just recently, not too long ago, from 38. Nothing wrong with saying, you know what, I want to be diversified, but because of tactical situations and structural changes. So Europe is a lot more heavily regulated than we are. And for you to say, well, I think there's diversification benefits there, especially when the valuations are so low. And the US, as we're seeing now, could run into some trouble with recession, with tariffs, or we just became too richly valued, too concentrated in tech stocks. And because it's impossible to time these things, that's why, but you, again, making tactical tilts, saying, you know what, I'm not going to abandon the international or emerging market index, but I'm going to have less. And if you did that recently, depending on what other things you had, it cushioned the blow. Clients who had some initial international and emerging market exposure fared a lot better. As these people approach retirement, this is where they kind of start to say, yeah, I got jealous of my friend with his concentrated tech bets, but I see the value now in having this diversification, having X amount of fixed income, having some international emerging markets, more than just the S&P 500. There are very few bad decisions in financial planning. There are just decisions where you haven't thought things out. If you are aware of a possible outcome, if you're aware, and we don't know what the future holds. The U.S. is probably going to be the dominant return machine. We might have a year or two here that I doubt it would be 10, where things might underperform. But that being said, it's hard to believe that we aren't still, with our innovation, we aren't still the dominant driving factor for another 10 or 20 years. But do you want to take that chance? Do you want your equities are what drives your portfolio? You can't get there without equities. You'd run out of gas. It's the gas that powers the engine. So put some thought into your strategy and tactics. Where are you going? Where are you going? Why are you going? How are you getting there? And also the strategy and tactics within even asset classes. And because of the last 10 or 15 years, try to look beyond the S&P 500 to have more predictable returns, to have a less of a chance of a lost decade or more. It's unlikely, but we don't. The S&P 500 could. I doubt we'd ever turn to Japan, but Japan kind of had a lost 2 or 3 decades. If you do those things, you're going to have a healthier, wealthier, and a happier retirement. Don't forget to hit subscribe. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends. Share the love. Make sure they have a healthier, a wealthier, and a happier retirement as well. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for free resources and check out our website and social media pages for exclusive content and updates. See you next time.
Sona Financial, LLC, DBA Sona Wealth and Sona Wealth Advisors, is a registered investment advisor with the state of Minnesota. All views, expressions, and opinions included in this communication are subject to change. This communication is not intended as an offer or solicitation to buy, hold, or sell any financial instrument or investment advisory services. Any information provided has been obtained from sources considered reliable, but we do not guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any description of securities, markets, or developments mentioned.